On the 30th of May 1892, about here in Kintore Avenue, Adelaide, workmen were digging holes ready for tree planting. One of the men had dug down about 3.5 feet and discovered a human skeleton. The site was between the gardener's house in this corner of the Government House grounds and over there where the home of the superintendent of the Destitute Asylum formerly stood. Kintore Avenue stopped here in a dead end in those days. The extension of the road through to Victoria Avenue didn't happen until 1958. The Anzac Memorial Walk was only created in 2016. Before that, the fence used to come out to the side of the road. The skeleton had obviously been buried in a deal coffin which had rotted almost completely away. Just a few wood knots were left. Work was stopped, and the following morning the skeleton was carefully revealed. The skeleton was of a man about 6 feet tall and was intact. The man had been clothed when buried, but everything except his boots and his belt had decayed. The coffin had been aligned with the feet pointing southwest rather than the orthodox east, and was tilted down at the head. The skeleton's identity is a mystery, but we can be fairly certain it was one of two men, George Hughes or Henry Curran. They, along with James Fox, were bushrangers in the very early days of the colony of South Australia. They didn't last long as bandits, and although tales were told decades later of numerous crimes they committed, in fact only 3 events were known. Hughes and Curran were both convicts who had been transported to New South Wales. George and his brother had been arrested for robbery in Gloucestershire, England. His brother was hanged, and George was transported to Australia for life. Hughes and Curran decided to travel overland to the new colony of South Australia, falling in with James Fox along the way. Fox was said to be a delicate man not suited to hard physical labour. They were all in their 20s. Hughes was 21, Curran was 27, and Fox was 24. For a while they worked as agricultural labourers at 10 shillings a week, but this life must have lacked appeal. On the 26th of January 1840, the trio decided to commence upon a life of bushranging. They rode to the hut of the Fender family, about 5 miles from Gawler, on the banks of the Parra River, which was known to sell sly grog. Minna Fender was outside with her children at dusk, when the nascent bushrangers rode up. Alerted by one of their dogs barking, she sent her daughter to see what was happening. The 3 had ridden in and told Michael, who met them, that they had been hunting emus all day and had nothing to eat. By this time Minna had come up to the shanty, and her husband asked what food she had for their visitors. They were given bread and butter, and then they asked for a dozen eggs. Minna said she only had half a dozen, and cooked those for them. After that the men asked for wine, and drank what was offered. They said it was their intention to wait for the moon to come up, and then ride back to Gawler. It was then that Hugh showed Michael their guns, and offered to sell him one. Michael didn't want a gun, so refused. Fox and Curran wandered outside for a while, then returned, and asked how much they were expected to pay. Hughes put his hand in his pocket as if about to pay, but merely pulled out a piece of paper. He gave the other 2 their guns, and they left. Hughes appeared about to follow when Minna said that they would have to pay for their meal. The other 2 returned inside, and pushed Michael, Minna and their daughter towards their bed, and told them to go to bed. Michael asked why they should go to bed, and was told the trio wanted their money. If they didn't get it, warned Curran, holding up his gun to Michael, he would shoot him dead. When the family protested they had no money there, Hughes picked up a lamp and held it near the thatch, and threatened to set the hut on fire if they didn't get their money. Curran then interjected, "Never mind, we'll find the money without firing the house." Fox remained on guard at the door, while Hughes and Curran rifled through 3 chests and pulled the sheets off the bed looking for plunder. They took a coat, a waistcoat, a bag, some rope, a pistol and a few other articles, which they tossed to Fox. Fox gave some things back to Minna, and had been going to return some more of the articles, but the other 2 told him not to. They then retreated, taking the lamp. Once the lamp was doused and it was dark outside, Minna decided to make a break and alert their neighbours. As she sneaked through the door, one of the men pushed her to the ground, and a shot was fired at her. Realising she had not been hit, she rose and ran to the back of the hut and hid. After the bushrangers left, the alarm was raised in Gawler, and a mounted trooper set out to ride the countryside, looking for the men and to warn other small farms of the danger. One of those alerted was Captain Walker's sheep station, about 3 miles from Fender's shack. The manager and 3 workmen, who were themselves all ex-convicts, were woken at 4 a.m, and the manager, on hearing the news, set a watch until daybreak. At sunrise the sheep were taken out to graze by the 2 shepherds, and the 3rd man, a bullock driver, went about his duties. At 10 a.m. they returned to the farmhouse, accompanied by 3 others. Used to seeing Curran, Hughes and Fox ride by on their way to work, the manager wasn't unduly alarmed at first. Not until Curran walked into the manager's room and sat himself down, gun in hand, and asked for food. The manager said they could eat when the workers' breakfast was ready. Curran replied, yes, but they needed some for the road as well. Out of the corner of his eyes, the manager could see 1 man at the door and the 3rd at the window, all with their firearms in hand. The manager asked Curran if they had taken to the bush, and Curran coolly answered, yes. But why? Persisted the manager. Curran said, it's all through the cursed drink. Curran asked what food was available. There was only 1 loaf of bread which had been baked, so he said he wouldn't take it all, and cut the loaf in half, placing 1 half in a bag. He then divided up some tea and sugar. The only meat was cooking, so he said he would wait. Meanwhile he helped himself to half the gunpowder, caps and shot at the farm. When the meat was cooked they took some of that, and then Curran produced a bottle of brandy and insisted everyone take a swig. When the bottle was empty the manager said, you've told me drink has brought you to this, and why do you carry it about with you, as your continued indulgence will be likely to bring you into the hands of the police, and to punishment? Curran responded by throwing the empty bottle away and said, there's the last bloody drop we will get, before launching into a rant, threatening some of the locals, especially a Captain Hall, who owned a nearby sheep station. Noticing Fox seemed half-hearted about being a desperado, the manager urged him to part with Curran and Hughes as soon as possible, which he promised he would do. The bushrangers wished the other men good morning and left peacefully. The trio had met the station workers as they rode in for breakfast, and when asked if they had become outlaws they admitted it. The workmen had gotten the bushrangers to promise they would not harm anyone at the station, and not take any more supplies than they needed, which they had honoured. Word was sent to Gawler, and soon 4 troopers were after the bushrangers, but the men had too much head start. They next appeared on the 28th of January near Mount Crawford, where the eponymous Mr. Crawford had established a temporary cattle run. An old soldier named Julius Fielder was employed as hut-keeper on the property, and he found himself stuck up one night. The trio stayed all night practising their shooting at a large gum tree, which they missed more often than they hit. They took rations, firearms and ammunition, and left in the morning. In their hoard was 20 pounds of flour, 6 pounds of pork, 4 pounds of sugar, a pound of tea, and 5 pounds in notes. They also took a tent belonging to a Mr. Jones. Later that day a traveller named Bull, who knew the old man, stopped by and heard of the events. Unaware of the robberies near Gawler, it surprised him, but some time later, in the area where the hills town of Woodside now nestles, he chanced upon an encampment of police troopers searching for the bushrangers. Although Bull told them where the men were last seen heading, the police said they could not disobey their orders of where to search, as their commander was away obtaining fresh orders. After this, Bull rode on to Crafers Inn. Crafers is a small village in the Adelaide Hills, which developed around a small pub called the Sawyer's Arms, built in 1839 and run by David Crafer. In 1840, when Curran and Hughes rode in, it was just the roadside hotel among the stringybark trees, in the densely forested tiers. Bull had been riding 3 days, and at 3 p.m. on the 4th of February, after stabling his weary horse, went into the pub for refreshment. Upon walking through the bar and into a private room, he was confronted by a big man with a gun, who said, "Here's another bloody Jimmy, I'll walk into him," meaning he thought Bull was a policeman, and intended violence toward him. Bull later learned this man was Curran. A splitter named Black Dick, who had sold timber to Bull in the past, spoke up. "Let him alone, he's all right, he carries no blunt," meaning a gun. "He's only just in from the bush." The Bushrangers had Mrs. Crafers and the ostler Hardiman bailed up and broke open a case of brandy. The bar was full of drunken timber cutters and splitters, and the Bushrangers were treating them to free drinks. After turning his attention from Bull, Curran had bailed up another man in the tap room. When this man noticed Curran's attention waver, he bolted out the door, with Curran in pursuit, who fired a shot from yards away. One of the timber cutters knocked Curran's arm, and the shot missed. Seizing his opportunity, Bull rushed out again to the stable. Mounting his horse, he started to leave, only for Curran to grab the bridle and attempt to unseat the rider. Bull smashed the heavy handle of his whip down on Curran, who collapsed to the ground, and rode off as fast as his tired horse could go. About halfway to Adelaide, Bull met David Crafer coming the other way. He filled the other man in on what was happening at his hotel. Realising he could do nothing himself, Crafer on his fresh horse rode off to notify the police. Bull again passed Crafer before he got to town, riding with a group of mounted troopers. When the law arrived at Crafer's, they found Curran and Hughes insensible from drink and easily arrested. Hughes and Curran were remanded on the 5th of February for numerous robberies in the Gawler and Para districts, along with 2 men also apprehended at Crafer's for stealing ale. Sergeant Major Alford had been down near the Onkaparinga River when he called into the homestead of a new settler named Richardson. Here he was given a glass of milk. At the same time a young man called in, and was also given some milk to drink. After he had gone, Alford was talking with a shepherd, who said he had seen 3 men shooting at a tree the previous day. Riding toward Adelaide, he encountered Sub-Inspector Edwards, who acquainted him with the news of the bushranging activity. From the description of Fox, he believed the young man at Richardson's was him. Edwards arrived in Adelaide on the 12th of February, bringing in Fox, who had been detected in a survey party he had joined. Fox was employed carrying a theodolite when arrested. The 3 bushrangers were tried at Whitmore Square in Adelaide on the 6th of March 1840 for stealing sundry articles from the fenders and for putting the people in bodily fear. The fenders told the court what had occurred on the evening of the 26th of January. Michael said Fox seemed very unhappy and seemed quite unwilling to be involved in the robbery. Richard Surrell testified that he had purchased the coat and waistcoat from Fox and a rifle from Curran, which Fender said appeared to be the same gun he had been offered. Sub-Inspector Edwards gave evidence that he had examined the scene on the night of the crime, and marks in the dirt corroborated Minna Fender's account of being pushed to the ground. In a fence about 3 yards distant from the spot, the policeman found 3 or 4 marks in the wood made by swan shot, indicating the slugs had passed over Minna as she sprawled on the ground. The jury found all 3 guilty, but recommended mercy for Fox. Later the same day, the men were charged with assaulting and robbing Julius Fielder, and again found guilty. On the 7th of March, all 3 were sentenced to death. Fox was reprieved before the hangings took place and sentenced to transportation, but died on the ship to Sydney anyway. The new colony was extremely concerned about the number of runaway convicts and ex-convicts coming from across the border, and so although the trio had not killed anyone, they were made an example of to deter others. Justice moved swiftly in frontier Adelaide. The day of execution was set for the 16th of March, just 9 days away. The men were held in the makeshift prison which was constructed in the northeast corner of the grounds of Government House in 1838. Although it was made of wood and surrounded by a wooden paling fence, it was nicknamed by its inhabitants as the Stone Jug. It was often overcrowded, and a number of escapes were made. Prisoners in Adelaide had been incarcerated aboard the HMS Buffalo at anchor off Glenelg until June 1837, when the ship sailed. After that they were chained to a log inside a tent on the banks of the Torrens River, until the Stone Jug was ready to hold them. Adelaide Jail was constructed in 1841, with the first prisoners moved there in March of that year. Adelaide Jail, now a museum and tourist attraction, remained in use as a prison until 1988. The execution took place in the square in front of the police barracks, today a peaceful, quiet area behind the State Library, South Australian Museum and the Art Gallery. Today an old stone building stands here, but in 1840 it was a wooden structure, open on the north side. Police built a fence on this side and guarded the site, as they'd heard rumours that friends of Hughes and Curran would attempt to rescue the men. As it turned out, the crowd who gathered solemnly regarded the ritual as a necessary evil. Finding someone who would act as executioner was difficult, even with the offer of £20 as an inducement, but someone eventually did. He was heavily disguised with a mask and padding on his body. It is rumoured his identity was later discovered due to his spending the money he was paid. He was an ex-convict, and he was either murdered by ex-convicts working in the Adelaide Hills or fled the colony in fear of such retribution. The 6 men under sentence of death, the others being Pye, Collins and Brown, proved to be troublesome in the Stone Jug, and were soon transferred to the police barracks, where they were confined in the sergeant's day room in irons. Sergeant Major Alford had a bunk in this room. The door from this room led directly into the guard room, where a sentry and relief men were stationed, with loaded carbines. One night the sentry roused Sergeant Major Alford, and whispered he could hear filing from the prisoner's room. Alford got up, saying loudly, "I want a drink of water," and then softly ordered the men to get their guns, and they rushed in. The prisoners had pulled the blankets over their head, and made loud snoring noises to disguise the noise they made as they filed the rivets in their irons. Once caught, they were made to sleep sitting in the guard room the rest of the night. The next day heavier irons were fitted, and on checking the bed, files and screws which could replace the rivets, but be easily removed, were found. The blacksmith was accused of supplying the tools, and even though he denied it, was not believed. Prior to this escape attempt the men had acted obediently, but now with all hope gone, Curran and Hughes became unruly. Fox and the other men were moved to a different room, as their death sentences had all been commuted. Curran had been given a fiddle and played jigs while Hughes danced as well as possible in leg irons. Any time officers checked in, they were subjected to a barrage of filthy language, jeering and laughing, as they showed they would be game to the last. Ministers of religion who tried to visit were similarly met with derision. At 8 a.m. on the 16th of March 1840, the pair were brought out to the scaffold. Hughes was accompanied by Reverend T.Q. Stowe, who valiantly attempted to maintain decorum. Hughes, smoking a pipe, gave the clergyman a mouthful of blasphemy. Even Curran appeared shocked as he quietly walked beside a Catholic priest, the Reverend Mr. Phillips, and begged his mate to die like a man. Hughes flung his pipe out of his mouth, saying nobody else would smoke his pipe. Then he attempted to slam into the executioner 2 or 3 times, despite his arms being manacled. All the while he dared the hangman to show his face like a man. As the rope was being put around his neck, he kicked the executioner. His legs had to be strapped together before the executioner would go near him again. Then as the trap was sprung, Hughes kicked his legs up, and his heels caught the edge of the platform, while the rope slipped down his neck. The Reverend Charles Howard, the colonial chaplain, kicked the man's feet away, and he died instantaneously, while Curran, who submitted without a fight, struggled on the rope for a while before death. The site of their execution is only about 215 metres, or 235 yards, from where the skeleton was found. It seems likely the bodies of the pair were brought back to the Stone Jug and buried in the prison area, probably by other prisoners. It was reported that the skeleton would probably be given a more decent burial, but there were no follow-up accounts, so what became of the skeleton is unknown. It could have been reburied, most likely in West Terrace Cemetery, or it could have gone to the South Australian Museum, who were once very keen on collecting anthropological specimens. And another mystery remains. There were 2 men hanged, but no other remains were documented as having been uncovered. Does the skeleton of the other man still lay here, just below the surface, nearly 200 years later?